I never thought I'd be saying this right now, only 19 games into the 2025 season, that it's time for Stephanie White to go. The Indiana Fever needs to fire Stephanie White. This is not going to work. What we're seeing is not going to work. It's just not going to work.
As we need to be honest here, Stephanie White's not going to change. Stephanie White is not going to change. Stephanie White is not going to stop until her style of drag everyone down to their level basketball prevails.
Stephanie White just had the worst nightmare of her life. After the Fever's humiliating blowout defeat, fans are demanding her resignation, and the heat is becoming intolerable. Even Caitlin Clark's followers are doubting everything since the coaching choices were so poor. White's coaching career in Indiana may be coming to an end.
Yesterday, reduced Caitlin Clark to a role player. She turned a star into a role player.
Do you believe Stephanie White should step down, or should she be given more time to resolve this issue? Please share your opinions in the comments. Stephanie White is fighting to keep her job after one of the worst coaching performances we've ever seen, and the Indiana Fever coaching situation has now reached crisis mode. The fan community is completely up in arms. Calls for her resignation are raging on social media. Can you really blame them?
Is trying to turn Angel Reese into a star. Stephanie White is trying to turn Caitlin Clark into a role player. Let that sink in.
Let's discuss the exact events that took place during that catastrophe against the Golden State Valkyries. It wasn't just a terrible defeat. This was blatant coaching misconduct. White made the astounding choice to turn Caitlin, the WNBA's top point guard, Clark, was reduced to a supporting position. As if she were a bench warmer, she literally removed the ball from her hands and placed her in a corner. It defies all logic to start Aria McDonald at point guard and move Clark to the wing. 4 weeks ago, McDonald wasn't even on a WNBA roster. Now, she's leading the offense over a player who led the league in assists the previous season. The arrogance is astounding. White claimed that she wanted 2 primary ball handlers on the floor as the reason for this catastrophe. In theory, that sounds adorable, but in reality, it appeared to be a total train wreck. Clark hardly made contact with the ball. They scored a pitiful 61 points on their own court due to a disorganized defense. That's a professional team producing at a high school level. The fan response has been harsh and quick. Demands for White's resignation are flooding social media. Additionally, the local radio programs are inundated with irate callers. People are claiming that if this is the goods they will receive, they will no longer purchase tickets. That is the type of fan uprising that results in coaches being sacked.
Stephanie White under fire by Fever fans. She blasted her team after the squad's loss to the Golden State Valkyries, which was a rough watch.
This is what truly bothers me, though. After the game, White had the audacity to point the finger at the players. She casually disregarded the fact that she had altered the offensive strategy entirely 2 days prior to the game while complaining about a lack of competitive fire and attention to detail. Naturally, the players appeared disorganized and perplexed. They didn't know what they were meant to be doing.
They were coming in here talking about lack of focus, lack of knowing the game plan. How do you summarize kind of what you saw out there?
I was disappointed because I felt like there was a lack of competitive fire. With the exception of about 2 5-minute spurts, our attention to detail was poor. I'm not sure if it's not knowing the game plan as much as, because if it's not knowing the game plan, then that's a whole nother conversation, as much as not executing the game plan.
The entire story is also revealed by the statistics. The Fever score more than 88 points a game on average when Clark plays point guard. They score roughly 80 points on average when she isn't playing. However, they score 61 points when she plays out of position on the floor, as she did against Golden State. It's not a coincidence. That is a direct consequence of poor coaching choices. White was equally terrible at managing timeouts. White would remove Clark from the game whenever she attempted to start something. She appeared to be deliberately attempting to undermine the prospects of her own squad. When their finest player establishes a rhythm, good coaches are able to spot it and capitalize on it. White took the complete opposite action. The defense plan was equally troublesome. Without making any changes, the Valkyries were able to trap Clark at half court. Where were the screens to release her? To penalize the double teams, where was the ball movement? Any good coach should be aware of these fundamental basketball fundamentals. Additionally, the substitution patterns were illogical. To create way for this experiment, Lexi Hall, possibly their greatest perimeter defender, was benched. Therefore, by benching their finest defender, they weakened both their defense and their offense by denying Clark the ball. White seemed to be attempting to lose.
But the competitiveness and the attention to detail, and willingness to play with multiple levels of effort. Prime examples when we get defensive stops, but then they get multiple offensive rebounds. That's 1-2. That's competitive fire. And that's unacceptable.
The fact that this team has demonstrated what they are capable of under the right coaching is the most annoying aspect. The Liberty was defeated by them. They have put up truly outstanding performances and defeated the Lins in the Commissioner Cup. However, when White engages in such antics, it begs the question of whether she is even capable of coaching at this level. Additionally, the timing couldn't have been worse. As Clark was recovering from an injury, White chose to drastically alter her role rather than gradually reintegrate her. That goes beyond poor coaching. That could damage one's career. When a player is already coping with injury issues, you don't screw with their confidence. Already irritated by the team's inconsistent performance, the fan base has now reached a breaking point. Owners of season tickets are threatening to cancel their renewals. Sales of merchandise are drastically declining, and the atmosphere within the company is poisonous. Ownership is compelled to make tough choices in such a setting.
I felt like our energy and our competitive fire was not there, and that's disappointing.
Why do you think you had some of these inconsistencies when it comes to focus and engagement, things like that?
I'd say discipline more so than focus. I think this is a group that focuses, but you can focus, and then you have to be able to go out and be disciplined enough to execute it, right? I'm not sure. We're, as coaches, that's our job to figure it out. Why it is. You've seen it in spurts, you've seen it in moments, you've seen it with certain lineups. So finding those lineups that we've seen it with consistently and maybe keeping those together. There's always going to be adjustments when you're working.
White's news conference following the game was especially instructive. She appeared shaken, defensive, and utterly unprepared for the criticism she was about to receive. She gave evasive replies about wanting diverse looks and relieving pressure on Clark when reporters questioned her about how she made decisions. However, the technique was a total disaster, as anyone with eyes could see. The contrast with other coaches in the league is striking. Observe how Sabrina Ionescu is used by Sandy Brondello with the Liberty. See how Nifa Collier's potential with the Lynx is maximized by Cheryl Reeve. These coaches create systems based on their star player strengths. Rather than modifying her system to suit Clark's advantages, White appears committed to forcing Clark into it. Additionally, organizational pressure is increasing. In order to develop around Clark, the Fever made significant investments in this roster, and White was chosen as the coach who could make the most of those investments. The front office will be forced to make a change if she is unable to produce results.
Start with you. Just how did it first of all feel to be out there, and second of all, what do you think the offense was just so disjointed here today?
It felt good to be out there. I thought we started really well. I thought we were competitive. I thought we played with energy in the first 5 minutes, and then when they kind of went on their first run, it kind of deflated us a little bit, which I'm not really sure why. But the offense, I think for us, it starts on defense, and we struggled, scouting report wise, we struggled personnel, we struggled to do what the coaches asked of us. And then, overall, we just played with more energy and effort. And, those are the things that just can't happen. So, it's every single person on our team, and, nobody played well today.
Additionally, there has been an increase in critical media attention. After initially endorsing White's hiring, reporters are now questioning her coaching philosophy and decision-making process. You're usually not far from losing your job when you lose the media. During the game, the player's body language was very worrisome. As Clark stood in the corner, waiting for touches that never materialized, you could see the frustration on her face. Regarding her part in the offense, Aaliyah Boston appeared perplexed. Because of how disturbed the flow was, Kelsey Mitchell appeared reluctant to shoot. That is what occurs when you make a complete system change without adequate planning. Another warning sign was the degree of effort. Players often play hesitantly when they don't know what they're meant to be doing. In the case of Golden State, that is precisely what took place. The frenzy gave the impression that they were playing to avoid making mistakes rather than to win. And that is a clear indication of inadequate coaching. Additionally, the scheduling justification is untenable. Although the start time was early in the afternoon, professional athletes have to be able to adapt to varying tip times. It speaks to coaching, not scheduling, that they were unprepared and disorganized. White's justification that he wants to ease Clark's pressure is especially offensive to fans' intelligence. Clark does well under duress. She is unique because of this. Removing the ball from her grasp does not relieve the pressure. Her influence is diminished, and the team as a whole suffers as a result. Under White, the growth of other players has also stagnated. What player on this squad has truly improved, except from Clark, who was already exceptional when she joined? It appears like Boston has deteriorated. The role players haven't made any progress, and Mitchell is incredibly erratic. That's coaching. There is more to the chemistry problems than just XS and OS. There appears to be a philosophical gap between White's goals and what would truly help this club succeed. The kind of performance we witnessed against Golden State is the result of that kind of stress, which is detrimental to team culture. Because of Clark, the level of fan support for this squad is at an all-time high, but White's coaching is wasting that kindness. Instead of seeing Clark stand in a corner while a backup point guard handles the show, they are watching her perform incredible feats. From a business standpoint, that is not sustainable. Ownership must be exerting tremendous pressure at the moment. Ticket sales, product sales, and television ratings are all intimately correlated with Clark's popularity and performance. It becomes a business decision just as much as a basketball decision when the coach actively works against that. The dynamics in the locker room are most likely tense as well. The entire roster becomes confused and resentful when your greatest player is being mistreated to this extent. Players begin to wonder if they will be benched for unknown reasons or arbitrarily shifted out of position. Additionally, White's past performance doesn't inspire confidence. Her time away from the WNBA didn't exactly demonstrate that she was prepared for this degree of responsibility, and her prior tenure with the Fever was at best subpar. The effects are self-evident, and the honeymoon phase is clearly ended. Additionally, there is an increasing amount of national media coverage of this issue. The WNBA cannot afford to have one of its star players mistreated to this extent when your coaching choices become a national conversation point for all the wrong reasons, increasing pressure on the organization to take action. An additional level of complexity is introduced by the contract scenario. White was given a multi-year contract, so terminating her would have financial repercussions. However, eventually, it becomes more expensive to remain a losing coach than it is to make a change. It is also necessary for the assistant coaching staff to be asking questions. The entire staff is put in a difficult situation when the head coach makes such dubious decisions. They have two options: remain silent and watch the ship sink, or speak up and jeopardize their careers. It's likely that the player development team is also irritated. After working with these players to help them reach their full potential in certain roles, the head coach enters the picture and makes drastic changes. That jeopardizes months of planning and development.